order, please. If everyone can find their way to a seat, that would be wonderful. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And welcome, Minister Bennett. Thank you very much for joining us today. And joining the Minister are her departmental officials, Francois Ducrot, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Policy and Strategic Direction. Thanks very much for being here. And Hélène Larandeau, Associate Deputy Minister. Thank you very much for joining us. And Paul Topple, the CFO of the department. Thanks very much for joining us. And of course, the Minister and departmental officials are here pursuant to the motion that we adopted at committee on February 23rd, 2016 to invite her and to hear about the mandate and the supplementary estimates. I'm just going to take a moment to describe the flow of the meeting today. We are going to start with an opening statement from Minister Bennett that will cover both the mandate letter and the supplementary estimates. And then the remaining time in that first hour up till 4:30 we'll use for questions from committee members, and we'll follow, of course, the speaking order and time allotments as reflected as illustrated in the routine motion. At 4:30, I'm going to suspend the meeting for a moment. People can have a breath and a glass of water, and then we'll resume within a minute or two with questions on the supplementary estimates. And at that point, we will return to the top of the questions order and start again with the same the speaking order and time allotments. So that's the shape of the day. And without wasting any more time, Mr. Bennett, I invite you to please to share your thoughts today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to be back to this committee in a slightly different role, but it is important that we always acknowledge that we're here on the territory of the traditional territory of the Algonquin people, unceded territory of the Algonquin people, and we're here to present the department's supplementary estimates C for the 2015-16 fiscal year and to discuss my mandate letter. I am joined by Hélène Larandeau, the Associate Deputy Minister for Indigenous and Northern Affairs, soon to become the Deputy, which I think we all congratulate her. It's very exciting. The Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Policy and Strategic Direction, Francie Ducrot, that many have seen at this committee a number of times, and our Chief Financial Officer, Paul Topple, who will take all the tough questions. It's exciting. Andy, congratulations as the new chair, and David is the vice chair, and all of the new committee members. But I'm particularly thrilled that Georgina and Romeo are here this afternoon. That makes this visit even more important to me. So thank you to bring your knowledge to this. And when I look at the work of the other members, that Don and from Thunder Bay, and Gary with the Rouge River Park, and Mike with Tyendinaga, and Michael with the whole of the Northwest Territories, and Matt, who of course has this huge responsibility of representing Fredericton, which was the riding of Andy Scott, who is in whose big shoes I fill, and who is a mentor and my best friend here on the Hill. So I thank you, Matt, for being here today. The work of this committee is so important. You have an amazing job and responsibility to Parliament, to all Canadians, and to Indigenous people and Northerners. We know that parliamentary committees are really the engine that drives democracy, and I know firsthand that all of the activities and open debates that you'll undertake help move the policy yardstick further, but also by shining a light on the work of this committee, we bring all Canadians with us as we embark on this huge job of reconciliation. Your efforts go a long way to advancing the ongoing discourse on the issues to the heart of our government, but I think issues that are shared concerns across all party lines. We understand that your job is to hold government to account. That's what Parliament does, and I welcome that. And I was thinking, just as I was coming in, that my 5 years as the chair of the subcommittee on persons with disabilities, when we were able to do hard-hitting reports, unanimous reports, that it actually moved the agenda on a lot of things that sometimes don't get the attention of Cabinet, or that you aren't able to actually move quite as quickly if there aren't parliamentary committees shining lights on things. So I thank you all by being here, your commitment to Indigenous and Northern issues, and I want to thank you for the invitation, both to discuss my mandate letter, which is exciting because it's transparent and open. We are also happy to discuss the paragraph that's in the mandate letter of all ministers about renewing the relationship. And we think that your scrutiny of these estimates is important to me, but it's also important as we look forward to the budget on March 22nd and the main estimates, and I look forward to coming back shortly after that, if we can, so we can help explain the choices that have been made. As with budgets and main estimates, there are always choices. So, as you know, the financial cycle of the estimates helps us better understand the complex narrative of progress on important issues. It helps me provide a more complete, detailed performance story that links the efforts of the past with those of this government. As we say that when the budget's tabled on March 22nd, it's a little, because of the electoral cycle, it's a little out of sync with the estimates, and there were no estimate Bs because of the fall, and so, you know, I think that we won't be able this afternoon get into the details on the spending priorities that we have to wait with bated breath till March 22nd, but it's certainly not too soon to talk about our current efforts, my mandate, and some of the highlights of the estimates. Le Premier ministre m'a confié un mandat important.
The Prime Minister has given me a significant mandate. He clearly stated that no relationship is more important to him than the one with the Indigenous people. The importance that he has given to this relationship is quite clear, not only in the letter of mandate, but in everything that is said to the ministers.
Priorities is to support and advance the work of real reconciliation with a vision that is positive, ambitious, and hopeful. Now, there's a Ojibwe word that many of you have heard me use, Ginigani Menani. It's the word for looking forward, with the deeper meaning of looking ahead to future generations. As some of you know, it's the title of the Métis artist Christine Belcour's beautiful stained glass window in the centre block here on Parliament Hill. As you know, the artwork commemorates the legacy of Indian residential school survivors and their families, and the window sits above the members' entrance to the lobby of the House of Commons. I believe it's a reminder to all of us who enter this House, and again when we leave each weekend, to go back to our ridings, to never forget, and to work together for a brighter future. Advancing real reconciliation in part means exactly that, collaborating in respect and cooperation to close the gap in quality of life between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. I happen to believe that this is entirely possible. I believe it's the work of every one of us as parliamentarians and Canadians. Reconciliation means a new relationship between all sectors of Canadian society and Indigenous people, not just with the government. In fact, I believe this renewal is necessary for Canada if it makes us proud. Upholding the principles of recognition of rights, respect, cooperation and partnership is a sacred responsibility, and it means an end to top-down approaches and a commitment to listen. It is, I think, that paragraph that has recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership in every mandate letter of every minister. But it means that each of us have to have those words really on the tip of our tongue, of a recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. It's only if we live those words that we will be able to realize the true work of reconciliation. So, Mr. Chair, that's why I've spent the first few months of my mandate listening and learning. I've made it my early goal to absorb and take in as much as I can from Indigenous communities across the country and from Northerners. As I've learned through my work on Indigenous as other issues, the phrase "nothing about us without us" must guide what we do as a government and as parliamentarians. I learned a long time ago that what I once thought was feminist leadership is actually Indigenous leadership. It is about asking, not telling. It is about inclusive decision-making. It is about the talking stick that goes around and everybody's views have been heard, and then you come to a decision together in terms of what's the best for the most people or the best for the people who need it most. And so this is a journey for all of us to change what leadership looks like and feels like. It's not top-down, Father knows best. It is about listening to communities and listening to experts and those with lived experience. To listen to concerns and advice and to understand how we best help close those gaps are long-standing issues: housing, employment, child welfare, education, and infrastructure. Together with my Cabinet colleagues, we've launched important discussions with all partners, including in Northern communities. One of our top immediate priorities has been the launch of the consultation on the design of the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And we thank you all for the all-party support for getting on with that work. Since December, my colleagues, the Ministers of Justice and Status of Women, and I have met with nearly 2,000 people from every corner of this country. These 17 meetings were held specifically for families and loved ones of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and for the many Indigenous women who have actually survived the violence, who was a group of people we hadn't expected, and that we had to rejig the consultations to make sure those voices were heard and valued. We're currently right now reviewing more than 4,100 online submissions and several written submissions. We have heard often raw and always heartfelt voices about the needs to address the causes of Indigenous women's and girls' vulnerability to violence: child abuse, poverty, lack of education and job opportunities, lack of affordable housing and shelters, the intergenerational effects of residential school, and the many issues related to police and child welfare practices. In many ways, this experience has been a prime example of the major challenges we face in improving conditions and outcomes for Indigenous people in general. The enormity of these challenges has been clear to me throughout my time on this file, but I do believe that right now that we are on the right path. We've begun consultations on addressing food insecurity in the North, meeting already in Northern communities like Norman Wells. We've followed up on our commitment to regular meetings with the leadership of the new governments and Indigenous leaders. J'ai déjà rencontré le chef national.
Already, I've met with the national chief, regional chiefs, and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis groups from across the country. I am proud of the progress we have made in only a few short months together, but we have a long way to go.
Is that what we had in the platform as nation to nation is not the way the Inuit people would prefer to describe their relationship. They would prefer to describe that relationship as Inuit to Crown. And so again, we continue to shape what we what we need to do together in a way that reflects the needs of the people that we are needing to work in total partnership with. Mr. Chair, the task ahead on other aspects of my mandate is both exhilarating and daunting, but there's, I believe, great momentum to push forward. We've committed, as you know, to implementing the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, starting with the implementation of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and for that I thank my colleague Romeo Saganash for all the work he's done on this, and that we have acquired the parliamentary guides for each of you that Wilton Littlechild and the other commissioners have completed with the help of the Interparliamentary Union, and we have those bound copies. There was just a bit of a glitch in presenting them at committee today, but they are available. We will work with respective ministers to enhance the role of Indigenous groups in the environmental assessment, as you already know, because we have already demonstrated progress to help us deliver on that promise. And as you know, in January, my colleagues, Ministers McKenna and Carr, announced the first step to enhance collaboration and consultation with Indigenous populations with respect to environmental assessment processes in order to best respect their rights and interests. Mr. Chair, we will promote economic development, create jobs, and improve infrastructure, safety, and childcare for Indigenous people. We will also work collaboratively to establish a new fiscal relationship and to make significant new investments in First Nations educations. As you can tell from the estimates process, it's very prescriptive. I think we're hoping that the new fiscal relationship will allow a greater flexibility in terms of communities being able to set priorities and be able to achieve the results that they want for their communities. And we expect to have more details on these commitments soon. In all aspects of my mandate, I've been clear that I welcome an honest and open discussion as well as the advice and support of this committee. As here today to do your important work on scrutinizing the Supplementary Estimate C, which was tabled on February 19th, and I know that you have to do the important work of voting on those at the end of this committee, and so we will try with my colleagues here at the table to get you whatever details you need in order to be able to vote properly at the end of today, but we also will get any additional information that you need in, Mr. Chair, in any format that you would like in terms of a letter or something circulated to the committee. I'd like to just provide a few highlights before taking your questions. The supplements, the sub-Cs for 2015-16 provide the financial resources to take action on a number of key initiatives. The largest item in these is $64.5 million for out-of-court settlements, but most notably for a settlement related to alleged errors in the creation of a reserve and setting up of reserve lands in the early 1800s. We have a lot of work ahead of us in settling the wrongs that are over 100 years old in so many situations. The second largest item is the $46.2 million required to reimburse First Nations on emergency management service providers for on-reserve response and recovery activities. As you know, from floods to fires, these are things that rightfully are reimbursed by our government when there are these emergency situations. The third item, which is $40.7 million, allows the department to continue the implementation of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, and as you know, we are working well through that process, but there are still settlements to deliver. The department will continue to process and resolve the independent assessment process claims in a timely manner through the negotiated settlement process. The fourth item, $40 million, was approved through Budget 2015 and will allow the department to continue supporting the Education Partnership Program as well as an early literacy activities delivered through the First Nations Student Success Program. The fifth item that I'll highlight is the $18.4 million will support other implementation matters for the settlement agreement between the Inuit of Nunavut, the Government of Canada, and the Government of Nunavut. Mr. Chair, these funds are used to provide increases to the Government of Nunavut implementation funding to increase Inuit employment in the Government of Nunavut and a Nunavut labour force analysis, which a lot of people feel is a very important next step in terms of achieving devolution. The department will also receive renewed funding of $16 million to continue its work on a proactive reconciliation and management of Métis Aboriginal rights and the management of Métis and non-status Indian litigation. Before I close, I will highlight a number of transfers with other government departments. Overall, these transfers net to about $1.3 million, and the most notable transfers include for the remediation of federal contaminated sites, amounting to $1 million. Contaminated sites is something that, oh wow, I think in terms of my very first briefing, the extent of this is just shocking in terms of a couple of really big projects around mines and what happens when mines default, and that we, as the Government of Canada, have the responsibility to clean up those sites. And it is also, I think in the transfer that you can see there that was providing the mental health support during the consultations on the design of the National Inquiry of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls is $1.7 million, and we were truly blessed to have the expertise of Health Canada support workers who had already done the work on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it was amazing to be able to just step into that resource that already existed. Mr. Chair, the government is committed to delivering federal programming that will play an important role in building strong communities while improving the quality of life for Indigenous people and Northerners. And in the spirit of Ginigani Mananing, moving forward, all ministers of the Crown share the Prime Minister's commitment to advancing real reconciliation. I value your opinions, advice, and assistance as we implement an ambitious agenda in this regard. You consider yourself all deputized, and we hope you'll go boldly forth and prosper amongst your colleagues in all parties and in all your ridings and with all Canadians. J'aimerais approfondir les discussions sur les façons de collaborer.
I want to pursue further discussions on how we can work together on these issues which concern us all. My colleagues will join me now in answering your questions about these estimates and about my mandate.
Readily available, as I said, we will get back to whatever the member would choose, either to you as the committee to circulate to all members or to the member directly, whichever they'd prefer. And on behalf of my whole team here and the team back there, all these amazing people that support me, thank you very much for the invitation today to be with you. And as they say, I'll be back.
Very good. Thank you so much, Minister Bennett. Thank you. So before we get to the questions, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. Committee member Charlie Angus is unable to be with us today and sends his regrets. He's dealing with a serious family matter. And in his place today are Romeo Saganesh and Georgina Jolivois, who will be sharing Charlie Angus's questioning time, and Romeo Saganesh will carry Mr. Angus's vote. Moving up the table, Ted Doherty, who's not a committee member, is joining Kathy McLeod, and who is a committee member, and they will share their time as well. And Kathy will, Kathy, of course, will maintain her vote. And Remy Messi, you've returned. Welcome back. I know you missed the first few moments because of another commitment. Are you sharing your time with anybody? Any other time sharing going on? No. Okay. We get to do that anyway. And we welcome, of course, the other members who are at the table. I very much appreciate your presence. So we have 29 minutes to get through the next 4 questions of 7 minutes each. So the timing is working out very well. And if we can get right into it. Oh, and just a reminder, these questions are on the mandate letter. We'll switch to supplementary questions after the first hour. So these are on mandate. And the first question goes to Don Rusnak. Please, Don.
I don't want to waste my time, but thank you, Minister, for coming, and thank you for bringing your staff here. It's very important work that you have in front of you, and I know a lot of the communities in my riding are very excited about this renewed relationship and the emphasis the government has put on it. Grand Council Treaty 3, and I've been getting calls from the Grand Chief Warren White almost constantly. They're chomping at the bit to get into a nation-to-nation relationship and what that looks like. How do you intend to implement the commitment to renew the relationship with Indigenous peoples on a nation-to-nation basis?
Great question, and as we look forward, it really is about respect. It is the recognition of rights and respect, cooperation, and partnership. And so it's not only what we do, but how we do it. And I think part of my job is also, it's not only the nation-to-nation piece, because I don't think we're going to get there if there isn't the interpersonal understanding of all Canadians. So I see that part of my job is also the work on the 96% of Canadians not from an Indigenous background as to how we move forward with them. And I think that's why the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission have been so important in terms of changing curricula, being able to move forward to deal with some of the real problems that come around stereotype and around assumptions that are still about dealing as though Indigenous people are an issue of the history of Canada or the past, instead of an exciting opportunity for the success and future of Canada. So it is but in the individual nation-to-nation piece, it is about dealing with the rights holders, dealing with the ability to listen and find how we can move the nations that are ready to from land claims to self-government arrangements. That it's exciting that new part of my department, or that part of my department run by Joe Wild, is out listening to what do communities want, and then how do we shape an agreement with them that will help them meet their needs. And that may be a treaty, or it might be this side of a treaty, but it actually is again with the nation, deciding what it'll take for them, what controls would they need to be able to set their own priorities and be able to find success for their community.
You good? Okay. We will.
I was going to say, if I have any extra
Oh, you
time,
do. You have time. You're not even halfway through.
I can give it to Michael McLeod.
Oh, very good. Okay. Michael, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to say thank you for coming to Northwest Territories, both yourself and Yvonne Jones, the Parliamentary Secretary. We're very appreciated in your discussions in Yellowknife and Norman Wells. I see that we have 2 challenges left in our as we move forward. First of all, the time. We only have 43 months, and less than that if you factor in an election year in the last year. So we probably only have 36 months in terms of my calculations. And we have also have to move past the old system of running the clock on negotiations and discussions. I have 4 questions for you. My office is bombarded by requests to meet, to talk to people in your department, to talk to yourself, to talk to Yvonne. Will you consider putting together an engagement strategy to start meeting with the Aboriginal governments across Canada? Mm-hmm. My second question is land claims, the settlement of land claims and self-government negotiations a priority for your department? And if it is, how are you going to do that? And there's so many questions regarding settled land claims and the inability of dealing with the agreements that everybody thought was in place. Fiscal harmonization is something that's new, that wasn't part of the negotiations, but it was brought forward. How can you deal with that? And third, I'm really curious as to how we're going to move forward on the Kelowna Accord. That was something that was in the platform. Some pieces will need to be discussed, and I'm told by all the departments that we raise it with that it's in this department's mandate. I'm really curious to see if we have a plan to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. The engagement strategy is an interesting one, and I think we probably do need to do that. I must say that my trip to the AFN in December was, depending on which region, had different approaches to their own idea of an engagement strategy. I think there was a couple of nights I was there till 11 o'clock, speed dating each of the chiefs in council. It was quite an interesting approach, and again, that part of the engagement strategy is what people would like, and that then we'll set something up. So it is asking, not telling. It is about figuring out what that looks like, and that it's quite different coast to coast to coast. But I do think that if we have principles and values about moving forward on these things, Michael, I think that we also know that the department's job and the regional directors general's job is to be moving these things forward, and that meeting with the minister isn't necessary in order to get progress every time. That we are giving pretty direct, pretty clear directions as to how we want things to move. And so the engagement strategy is about me and the department, but it is about this refreshment in the relationship and going forward. So, I would love your help on that, and we'll figure out how we can best do that coast to coast to coast as we try and get around to the regional meetings and the places where, in terms of I can meet with as many people as need to meet with me each time. On the land claims, I think you're quite right that the Government of Canada signed some things, and the reason we have a land claims coalition is because the implementation doesn't feel right, and so we're very keen that we do better in the implementation of these claims and meeting to actually set some targets as to how we actually get this done. And on the Kelowna, I think in the platform what we talked about was a Kelowna-like strategy, or process. I don't think 10 years later we can just download Kelowna and implement it. We need to be out and consult. And I think that's why the reconciliation framework is what we're aspiring towards, and it means that we have to again listen to First Nations, Inuit, Métis, urban Aboriginals. How do we move forward on developing a framework for reconciliation that does two things? One is close the gap in the outcomes, which was the real focus of the Kelowna Accord, and secondly, how do we change not only the fiscal relationship but also the governance that would actually move to nation to nation?
I'm terribly sorry we're out of time on that question, and you understand it's to maintain fairness. And I did forget to mention that I have these two cards, and with 1 minute left, and I forgot to use them.
And you want me to look at them too?
Someone next to you will nudge you. Yellow's for 1 minute, and red is 10 seconds. Please conclude your statement. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The next question goes to Kathy, please.
Thank you, Minister, for coming, and certainly you have a very ambitious and hopeful agenda ahead of you. I noticed that some of the top priorities in your mandate letter from the Prime Minister talk about implementing the UN Declaration and also the 94 recommendations of the TRC. I presume when they say implement, they don't mean saying it's an aspirational document. This means implement. I think there's some excellent recommendations. I think there's some excellent pieces to the UN Declaration. I also believe that there's some areas that are going to be very, very problematic. And I just want to start with the, Section 26 you know, in the Canadian legal context, and I've read a lot of lawyers and their opinions on this particular area, and it talks about, you know, it might run directly in the face of state sovereignty and the ability of federal and provincial governments in their respective areas to move forward. So I think we need to look at the Williams decision, which did talk clearly to the, you know, there are times, rare times, where the federal government ultimately has to make a decision. So can you sort of align the UN Declaration, the Truth and Reconciliation, and that whole ultimate ability? And I know you're going to consult more, but at the end of the day, will you still make the decisions as the federal government when you have to?
Absolutely. And what I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action are, I think, spectacular in terms of, again, even how we and the order. It starts with children. It moves through. It's a very good blueprint for my work. Okay. On the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, I think that there have been concerns about free, prior, and informed consent. There have been concerns even expressed by the special rapporteur that some people have taken it like a medical procedure. But it actually is about building a relationship.
So thank you, Minister. So at the end of the day, what I did hear was if the federal government did have to make a decision, and I'm going to use pipelines as an example, and I know we talked to National Chief Bellegarde, and let's say the Kinder Morgan, and through the interior of British Columbia, there is agreements in place with the bands. They're very, very happy, and they hit the ocean side, and it's like, whoa. So I don't think that I mean, what would consent mean? I mean, when you have 25 bands and you have 20 that say yes and 5 that say whoa, how are you going to deal with that?
I think that what happens is that you have to start earlier when you're planning the thing. That's what the actual implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The Nisga'a people have already planned for an energy corridor through their territory and would love a refinery. That it is about listening to people and not planning something and then all of a sudden going, you love it, don't you? It isn't going to work that way.
Okay.
And so we want people to be engaged very early, and then we can find the win-wins.
Okay. So I appreciate that, and you might have noticed some of my questions in question period. I really do have some significant concerns. In the TRC report, they call on the government to repudiate concepts such as the doctrine of discovery, terra nullius, and you know the government is very reticent to defend private property owners' rights. So let's say essentially all of British Columbia is you know under treaties that have not been settled. We have not settled those treaties, so really all of British Columbia is on the table. Tell me what this is going to mean to the private property owner when you implement these different recommendations. So what can I say to my ranchers and the people in my communities as you're going through this process to reassure them that, yes, I think most of the ranchers in my community, and I did like when National Chief Bellegarde said, we need peace in the valley, and you know, many of these communities have worked side by side for years, and they're together, and they, you know, in many ways, they could come up with solutions, I think, so much better than we could. But tell me what to tell to these fearful people that are concerned about private property and what some of these concepts in the TRC and the UN DRIP are going to mean.
I mean, I think even, well, I guess to quote Chief Bellegarde, who supported a definition that said veto is not utilized in free, prior, and informed consent in the UN Declaration, but it's about collaboration and working together. And I think peace in the valley is what people want, but they want to have been consulted. And when you talk about terra nullius or discovery, you know, doctrine of discovery, recognition of rights is that there were some people here first. Mm-hmm. And that's what Chocotin, the Supreme Court, said. Mm-hmm. These people have title. And so it is about working together, recognizing that there were people here first who have rights. And so that, I don't think, and I don't know of any First Nation that wants to bankrupt the country or bankrupt a province or territory. They want to work together. It's not a divorce, it's a marriage, and we got to work together and figure out how to do that.
And I certainly, and I think more than, I think the people at this table do recognize that we have to get there. We have a long way to go. We have a lot of responsibilities. We do, and I love the BC cattlemen. They're not hearing from the federal government right now is a commitment to, when there's other parties that have interest in an area, whether it's ranchers or private property, that there is a principle from the federal government that says avoid, mitigate, compensate. So we adopt that principle when you're dealing with third parties: avoid, mitigate, compensate.
I think that where there is concern is when it's something that could disrupt the land and the water. So where I think that people are most concerned is where there is the prospect of a mine and tailings and the kinds of issues that could seriously affect a way of life, and that the people who were there first have a right to say that, did you know that is our traditional, that is the caribou crossing where you want to put that highway? What are you going to do about it? Where this will affect where we fished for millennia. So it is about talking together to really get this done.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy, for that. Next on the order is Georgina, please.
Minister, and thank you. January 22nd, 2016 was a very sad day for La Loche and for all of Canada. I appreciate you coming to visit us in La Loche, as well as the Prime Minister and other ministers who came to visit us. To the questions, there were some specific requests made when your visit regarding the additional RCMP members to work with the schools on the reserve in town, mental health, and the support for PTSD, as well as the reinstatement of the Project Venture Youth Initiative to other initiatives. What can I tell the people when I go home this spring?
Thanks for that, and thank you for joining us at all the meetings. And I think we learned a lot in that visit, and it's really important as we go forward, and we go forward together with the province and the First Nation and the town and the Métis community, and our job as the federal government that funds the Tribal Council to provide the health supports that hopefully will be able to help again in terms of the Friendship Center that ended up being exemplary, the best Friendship Center in the country last year, but as well things like Project Venture that we know work, and that where we are working very hard. I think I told you my brother-in-law works in land-based healing in Alberta, and thinks that Project Venture is fantastic. So yeah, we're going to work together on all of those. As you know, in subcontracting the RCMP to Saskatchewan, they make those choices, but we are working with the Minister of Public Safety and trying to make sure that we can make sure that your community moves forward in a good way, and on each of those details, you and I can work together on ticking those off.
It's really sad to hear that answer. I'm sorry, because it's really hard when I go back into the community and listening to the stories, the painful stories. But moving along, the tribunal, according to the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, since the Human Rights Tribunal ruled that Canada racially discriminates against First Nation children, there have been 400,000 nights slept by First Nation children in foster care, and health care denials continue. Yet Canada has not taken any action to relieve the children's suffering, despite having recommendations for immediate relief on the books from the Auditor General and Joint First Nations INAC reports dating back 16 years. Why are these kids still waiting for action?
You know, the system is broken and it needs to be fixed. And we need the child welfare system overhauled. And regardless of the result of the tribunal finding, we were going to have to fix this. And we applaud the work of Cindy Blackstock and so many of the advocates saying, you know, when we've got more kids in care now than at the height of residential school, and when those kids are dying by suicide and by becoming missing and murdered, this is unacceptable. And so this is one of those things where the jurisdictions get in the way, and that we have to work with the provinces and territories, the First Nations, the municipalities, and we've got to fix this system. And I look forward to your help.
Okay. Do I still? Oh. Residential schools, the Métis, when you came visit us, the Métis the National Council of Canada, as well as the province and the regional board, talking about the boarding schools. Have you had further discussions and further movement on that file?
Thank you for that. And as you know, the Indian residential school settlement agreement is for this many children that were affected by those policies. And so we are working very hard to deal with cases coast to coast to coast that didn't fit into in that particular agreement, and working with the Minister of Justice, we are trying to figure out how we can get out of court or stay out of court and be able to do whatever we can to do right by those children. The abuse and what they've lived through and the consequences to Canada are unacceptable, and that we've got to understand really what happened and how we can fix it.
If you're sharing inside the question with Romeo, you've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yeah.
Maybe Romeo, you could give a tutorial on UNDRIP. Could you just help with the answer?
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you, and I want to thank the Minister for being here today. I did want to go back to Kathy's questioning because I think it's a fundamental question for not just Indigenous peoples in this country, but for all Canadians, and we need clear answers on some of those questions. I want to start by asking a very quick question. As early as 2004, in the Haida Nation case, the Supreme Court has determined that the high end of consultation with Aboriginal peoples, that obligation, is full consent of the Aboriginal nation on serious matters. Okay, the Supreme Court has not determined what serious matters meant, but they talked about full consent already in 2004. 2014 case in Chilcotin, you mentioned it. It mentions consent 9 times in 9 paragraphs. It mentions full control of resources and territories 11 times in that ruling in 2014. Do you agree that free, prior, and informed consent is already in Canadian law?
Great question. Well, free, prior, we have accepted the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We will implement it, and it will include free, prior, and informed consent. And so we will work, with all jurisdictions and all departments to help them better understand what free, prior, and informed consent looks like and feels like, and in terms of respecting those rights.
Thank you, Minister. And thank you very much for the question. Sorry, we're short there. Michael, please. This will be the final question on the questions on the mandate letter.
Thank you, Madam Minister.
Sorry, Michael, we have a sort of point of order here. Yep.
I know, Chair, that you talked at the beginning that we would take a break and sort of switch, but, I believe we did start late, so with the committee's indulgement, we don't get the Minister here very often, and I wonder if we could, if people need to get up and grab a drink, they're welcome, but maybe we could just flow straight through. That would be great.
That provokes a follow-up question, Kathy. Will we just continue through the order, questioning order, down to the 5-minute questions and so forth in that regard? Is there agreement from the committee to do so? Yeah, okay, I see agreement. Thank you very much. So,
The will of the committee, but in the second hour, if people want to ask questions on mandate, that's fine too. This is it's your 2 hours, so do what you want. And the supplements, the sub-Cs are pretty straightforward, I think, and and the mandate is huge. So if whatever you prefer to do, I'm happy with as well.
okay, I see a lot of...
But I will be back after the budget on the mains.
I see nodding heads there, so I just would make sure that the members do have the information they need to make their vote at the end on the subs. So with that, we'll carry on through the order without a break. And Michael, please, and I beg your pardon for the interruption.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was pleased to hear that you recognize that the system is broken. I think you've also been quoted as saying you've got to change the machinery of the government as we move forward. And we also heard very recently from the FN that the comprehensive claim policy is outdated, it needs to be reviewed, and he also recommended, the Grand Chief or National Chief recommended that the review committee be established so that they can review it and update it. Is that something you would consider doing, or is that something in your plans that we can expect to see?
Well, I think even the words comprehensive claim bug a lot of people in terms of having to claim for something that's already theirs. So it's a, and again, I think that the work of Joe Wild in the Treaties and Aboriginal Government part of the department is innovative and creative, and we're asking them to be as innovative and creative as they can be to put on paper what a reconciliation agreement would look like with what were once called comprehensive claims. So, yeah, we want to find certainty in a way that communities can go forward. So, again, it's something that we need the advice, but it's going to be different coast to coast to coast, and I think that new flexibility around 150 million or not, and is there were many sort of linear sort of boxes there. We can do this, but we can't do that. That we are trying to just erase such that people can be creative and find something that'll work for them.
Mr. Chairman, a lot of Aboriginal governments that are involved in negotiations are contacting my office and saying that the same players that were with the Conservative government are still in the negotiations. They're the same people, the same mandate, yet this government campaigned on real change. Has there been new direction provided to the bureaucracy, to the people? Has the mandates been reviewed and updated to reflect what was in the platform?
Absolutely, and I think that particularly with civil servants, that my experience over the years is that loyal implementation is exactly that. They take from my mandate letter what they've got to do, and their job is to move forward what I've been asked to do by the Prime Minister. There may be situations where independent negotiators are not making progress, and then that'll have to change. But mainly it's been the mandate to be creative and innovative, but it's also making sure that people have the clear direction that this is about a negotiation. This isn't about take it or leave it or we'll see you in court. And that has been, I think, a very distinct change that I hope will feel different on the ground. But there's no question that the people working in my department know exactly what we want and how we will see success. And that's going to be getting some of these tricky ones done. Is that?
And if I may add, with the permission of the chair.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. I have another question. I think the minister answered, but I still see the issues such as harmonization proposal on the table that was introduced by the previous government. I'm hoping it's not something we're going to honor as a new government. We also heard from the AFN that there's 58 Aboriginal languages in this country and only 3 may survive. And we need to do something about revitalizing Aboriginal languages. I was hoping to see something in the terms of the Kelowna Accord that would focus on languages. I wanted to ask the minister if there's any plans to develop a strategy that will put investment or work on trying to do something very quickly.
I think in the mandate letters, Michael, you'll find that language is in the mandate letter of Minister Joly, and that is something we're working together on. So I get to work on language and culture in early learning and childcare, in K-12, in pushing on the post-secondary institutions. We're thrilled when we can see, even at La Loche, one of the immersion Dene schools, or what the Mi'kmaq are doing, we can see progress. But around the preservation of these languages that are at risk, Minister Joly has that and is working on it, but it is something that we'll do together.
Time's out? No?
No, you've still got a minute.
Okay. I have one final question. It's regarding being consistent in negotiations. We have a lot of issues across the Northwest Territories on cross-border land claim negotiations, land on opposite sides of borders. We have the Dene who have a claim in the Northwest Territories that was put forward by the federal government, said we're going to carve out a piece without really support or consultation with the government of Northwest Territories. But yet we have the Fort Liard Dene and Métis who are negotiating and want to have traditional lands on the BC side and Yukon side, but there's no consideration for them. And we also have the same issue with the Gwich'in on the northern part of the Northwest Territories who have rights in the Yukon side. And I'm looking to see how we're going to balance that out so we can be consistent, not do one for one group and not do it for the other.
Just 15 seconds, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, I think that's the magic of hoping to go forward. I think we've got some ones coming forward shortly that do deal with transboundary claims, and I think you'll be happy to see those because it means that people have been talking to one another.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're moving directly now into the 5-minute questions, and it had been our plan to move into supplementary estimate questions now, but as the minister is invited, please feel free to ask questions on mandate or supplementary. We're switching to 5 minutes now, and Arnold Veerson has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the minister for coming here this evening. I really appreciate it. In my riding and in David's riding, we have a very unique situation in that we have a settlement with the Alberta government back in 1938 with the Métis people, and it gave the Métis people their own land. I'm just wondering what, in your view, what constitutes a Métis nation, and how will it affect these communities that are in my riding?
That's a great question. It's thankfully, I mean, it's basically up to the Métis people to sort that out, not me. But there have been many court rulings, and it is again an opportunity we're seeing with Manitoba Métis coming to terms with an agreement. I think that there's real optimism around what the Métis Nation is looking for in being able to determine their rights in a new political accord with Canada.
So would they be? How do they fit into your framework of the nation-to-nation discussions, I guess? Are they their own nation, or are they going to be dealing with the provinces on this kind of stuff?
It's a good question. If you speak to the president, Clem Chartier, he will tell you that the Métis Nation of Canada is the only nation that's already a nation in nation-to-nation negotiations, that the AFN and the ITK represent the rights holders. So it's a as always, there's politics in people, but it is a exciting time, I think, for the Métis in Canada.
Thank you. One of the TRC recommendations was to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code. This would essentially criminalize parents who spank their children. Although I sympathize with the symbolism of this request, I guess one of the things that it is removing this section is disrespectful to all Canadians from a vast array of backgrounds, faith, cultural communities, and who believe that non-abusive punishment is an important parenting tool. In Sweden in 1979, they repealed a similar section, and that had the effect of putting 22,000 children into the care of the government. And so it's kind of an interesting place. Will you commit to ensuring the rights of all Canadians, including Indigenous peoples, will not be undermined with this purely symbolic gesture?
Well, I think there's people like Senator Airview Bayet who've been fighting for this for a very long time, and certainly people coming to my office on a regular basis wanting this repealed. The fact that it ended up in the TRC calls to action, I think, was surprising to some, but I think welcome to many others. As you know, this is something that the Minister of Justice is looking into, but as a family physician, I have to say that it is, there is a way of doing this that explains that in our society we don't condone people hitting one another and then expect them not to go out and hit other people. And so, but that I think that it's also up to the judicial application of this that means that if you're stopping a kid walking into traffic, or all of the examples that get used as to why we can't do this, that we can find a way through that honors the TRC call to action, but also puts it in a practical way where children can be kept safe.
Yeah, I thank you for your answer on that, and I would just consider consulting other groups, including the Indigenous peoples, on this as well. So. Well,
I think that, yeah, the Minister of Justice will be consulting broadly, and I think that certainly the Justice Committee will end up, I think, welcoming a role there as well as they consult all Canadians.
For sure. Do I have more time?
I think you're right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. Next up for 5 minutes is Gary Ananda Sangri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Minister, thank you very much for your hard work and your long-term commitment to this issue. You know, it just occurs to me that the child welfare system is not the appropriate authority to quote on assessing how we should be changing the laws. I think it's, if anything, the recent case from the Canadian Human Rights Commission has outlined the complete failure of the child welfare system. The TRC is a fairly elaborate, it gives us 94 recommendations that we've committed to implementing. And I know it's quite a grand commitment, but it's a very serious commitment. Now, how do we ensure that we have a proper timeline for those recommendations being implemented? And in your view, what would be an appropriate timeline for this?
Well, again, there's things that we're just thrilled that are happening already. The provinces and territories that have really picked it up, because the interim report of the TRC did warn people that this changes to the curriculum was coming, and the Northwest Territories and Nunavut got on with it. That there were, at the TRC hearing in Alberta, the minister committed to that. So we've been seeing this happening. The universities have been moving on the recommendations that apply to them around Indigenous courses, and we're thrilled that both Lakehead and the University of Winnipeg have already moved on those. This is great. We have a little guide that I'd love to share with you in terms of how we, our little framework in the department for the 94, and then who actually's job it is and how they can get on with those. And I'm happy to table that with the chair, but in both languages. But it's exciting because it's about partnerships, and it's not that we can, legislate everything. It's a matter of welcoming partnerships that'll help us with these challenges. And the first section there on child welfare is one that worries me every day. We've got to fix this, and it is apprehending children, taking them away from their language and culture is just inhumane, and we've got to turn this around. And again, that's, as we say, all, from the jurisdictions to the First Nations to everybody. We've got to figure out another way to do that.
Equally important, I think, is I think for the first time in history, we have surpassed 25% of our inmates are now Indigenous, of the Indigenous population. So what, in your view, is the toughest recommendation to implement, and what are some of those hurdles?
Well, I'm not sure the Pope's going to do what I want, but
this Pope may.
But I know there's lots of religious people who will be pressuring the Pope, other than myself. But it's hard to say to pick one. I don't think it's by accident that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission put the ones on children first. This one around the effect of child abuse in Canada is something that is responsible for addiction. It's responsible for the number of people in prison. That, some of the numbers we see are at 80% of people in penitentiaries, 80% of kids, of people with addictions. This is huge, and I don't know what the levers are to stop this. But we've got to do something. Because hurt people. And it's what we're hearing on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's what we're hearing in terms of violence, domestic violence, all of these things coast to coast to coast in Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, that the effects of child abuse and therefore the sequelae of residential schools is something that we've got to begin with the healing and understand, from linking child abuse and PTSD and addictions and incarceration, that's I think a project that we need for Canada to help all Canadians understand those links.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister.
Goes to David Utica, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here today, Minister Bennett. I appreciate the opportunity to get your thoughts on a variety of subjects. And one of my biggest concerns and passions is food security and the cost of food in the North. And obviously, I don't believe any child should go to bed hungry, and that's a real concern of mine. In the past, you have called Nutrition North a total failure in 2012 and made suggestions that we go back to food mail, yet the government's committed to spending $40 million to the program, more dollars to the program. Have you changed your opinion of the program, or was it just a lack of funding?
It's not working, and so what we've you know, what I've been asked to do is to at least include the communities that weren't included in the food mail program. So there was a view that the food mail program wasn't working because certain numbers of communities weren't included. So we're including those, and then we're going to spend a year figuring out how to fix it. What I've been hearing, particularly in the remote and northern communities and in the territories, is the access to country food is one of the real issues around people not being able to afford to be hunters anymore, from gasoline to ammunition to boats and motors, snow machine repairs, that the hunters are despondent that they've no longer been able to feed their families. So I've been interested in looking at what some of the land claims, some of the harvester programs have been, but in the meantime we'll have to include these other communities as we go and consult. In that there's, when you're in Nunavut, people keep telling me there's lots of fish. There's lots of fish. There isn't reason for people to be hungry. And so if we're going to judge how this program's working based on hungry kids, we've got to figure out a different way of going about this. And, you know, it's not by having, you know, cheaper sugar pops. I mean, even though that's not what Nutrition North did, but fighting about what's on a list, taking diapers off the list, and then there's not enough money to feed other things. We keep hearing the problems, and mainly we heard that Northerners didn't feel that they'd been consulted, and that's where we have to start.
So you just mentioned that you're going to be expanding the program to be more inclusive of other communities that are currently not on the program. Do you have a number of communities that are you changing the criteria so they qualify, or are you just going to be naming communities?
I think there were communities that met the criteria of remote and rural, and I guess it's 15 more that we've identified. I mean, if there are others, I'd like to know about it, but I think right now there were 15 communities that were identified as not being in the food mail program, therefore didn't qualify for Nutrition North, and so we're gonna for step one is to include those, and then to figure out how we fix the program.
So with these additional communities being added to the program, and we got an additional $40 million. So the people who are on the current program that are benefiting from the savings of the food, so there's not going to be any additional funding for the communities on it, because $40 million isn't a lot of money over 4 years. So if you got 15 more communities, so is that going to be taking away from the current program? Because $10 million a year, that goes quickly when you've got additional 15 communities. So when you're adding communities, is actually reducing the amount of subsidies for other communities in the north?
Well, we're increasing the money, but we're also increasing the number of communities, but we know that it has to be dealt with differently, and that as you know, the Auditor General wasn't too happy with the value for money, or the way that whether this was actually saving money. And what I keep hearing is that I used to be able to feed my family, but now when I take my shopping cart out at the end of the week, it seems to cost more. So even though certain foods were subsidized, the cost of feeding your family in the way that you have to deal with other foods and staples isn't working. So I think there's a revision that has to take place, but I think we do have to include those other communities, and then we've got to figure out is it a social program or is it a fairness program? And if it's a social program, then is it going to the people who need it most in terms, and are we dealing with hungry kids or not? And when you've got 70% of kids in Nunavut from food insecure homes, we got to do something else.
Thank you, Minister. The final 5-minute question is from Mike Bossio, please.
Thank you so much, Minister, for being here today and answering our questions fully. We appreciate that. Under the review of legislation and the nation-to-nation relationship and all the ways that we're trying to change our relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada, I'm wondering, I think at the root of a lot of it is self-determination. And being able to expand that so that First Nations have self-determination over education, over health, over resource extraction, over environmental protection, etc. Is that part of in this legislative review and in your relationship with Indigenous peoples? Is that part and parcel of the end goal of what we're trying to accomplish?
Absolutely, and I think that I thank you for that, because I think that it gives us an opportunity to talk about what happens when First Nations or communities feel in control of the choices and setting their own priorities. And so, and I know there's been some in British Columbia, the Chandler and Lalonde report that showed that the communities that were in charge of health, education, justice, back doing their ceremonies, that they watched the suicide rate in those communities just drop dramatically. And so it's a matter of a sense of control over your life that gives people hope, and the idea of secure personal cultural identity, we know, is the key to dealing with overcoming social determinants into healthy choices, good health outcomes, good education outcomes, good economic outcomes. But it is about being in control and in that sovereignty. Yeah.
So in being able to do that, though, I notice in the estimates that a large chunk of the estimates is grants, and I look at that, and I go, okay, so what kind of long-term sustainable funding is there for there to be self-determination through a grant-like process? Are those funds dedicated dollars to specific purposes or specific nations, or how, it's very difficult to try to understand what that really means.
Well, as you saw in the mandate letter, I am charged with evolving a new fiscal relationship. And again, that you've heard many First Nations say they would rather have a transfer than little grants that you get a little money for this, a little money for this, and a little bit of money, and don't you dare move the money from here over to here because you're going to get caught, and it doesn't work. And so we're watching communities needing to rob Peter to pay Paul, and to be able to address emerging urgent needs in their community. So that's where we're hoping to go. That's what, whether it's land management or whether it's moving along the continuum to self-government, that's what we're hoping. And in terms of the Minister of Justice, that was her role at the AFN under the governance, was actually being able to help people when they're ready and able to be able to take more and more control and to build that capacity in First Nations.
So finally, and I know I'm running out of time, but I know we've talked about lifting the 2% funding cap. And so once again, this kind of leads into the same discussion that there are huge deficits now that have accumulated in many of the budgets to First Nations. And now, how do we now start from the new slate and say, okay, from here on now we're going to have a new funding formula, or do we go back and go, okay, these are the deficits, we're going to try to eliminate those deficits so it's a level playing field, so that moving forward the funding, and does it become a permanent type of funding formula, or how is that going to work?
So as you know, the 2% cap was actually an escalator. Mm-hmm. And so, but it then didn't keep up, right? Frankly, in the devastating budget of 1995, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister had to choose that in order to protect my department from the across-the-board cuts that were happening to every other department, they put in this 2% escalator to make sure that the fastest growing population was getting a little bit of an increase while all the other departments were being cut. That being said, it stayed in place way too long, and Kelowna would have lifted it, but now we're in the business of having to just stop the music and start again. And we hope that the investments that we're making in Budget 2016 will begin that, but also the way going forward will be much more in keeping with the fastest growing population and the needs.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thanks for the question, Mike. The next question is a 3-minute question, and it goes to Romeo Saganash. And Romeo, are you sharing your time with your colleague Sherry Benson?
No, I'll take up the three minutes, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I just want to...
Full 3 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to, because I want to complete our discussion on FPIC, because I've been in this business for 35 years. I know that clarity is important for everyone. And I know that clarity is good for development.
Yep.
And it's good for the economy of this country. UNDRIP has been around, well, adopted by the General Assembly in 2007. FPIC is part of it. TRC makes UNDRIP a centerpiece. As a matter of fact, they say that it should be the framework of reconciliation in this country. Your mandate letter makes a reference to it. It requires you to start with the implementation of the UN Declaration. The Prime Minister has spoken before the Assembly of First Nations and made reference again to UNDRIP and start there. There's a recent report from the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights that came down just recently on the 4th of March. And one of the concluding observations and recommendations of this commission refers to FPIC. And let me read for the record to the committee's recommendation. The committee recommends that the state party, meaning Canada in this case, fully recognize the right to free, prior and informed consent of Indigenous peoples in its laws and policies and apply it in practice. That's the recommendation from that committee. Madam Minister, as you're probably aware, I introduced the private members bill last year, while in the previous Parliament, about UNDRIP and making sure that the laws of Canada are compatible with the provisions of UNDRIP. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I told you that I would come back with my private members bill. And in the spirit of reconciliation, I offered that one of the members from the government side be a co-sponsor to that private members bill. That was a sincere offer in the spirit of reconciliation. How was the thinking on that coming along?
Well, step one, I'm pleased to report to the member that in November 2015, I think you know that we joined the consensus without reservation for the first time in 5 years. So in terms of the annual General Assembly, and so I look forward to having the conversation in terms of how we go forward with you and your bill. I know that we are committed to implementing it and implementing across government departments. So we're happy to work with you and just see where we can get with this in our genuine commitment to make this happen.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question, Romeo. That brings us to the bottom of the first order of questions, which means we're going to reset and go back to the top with 7-minute questions. I'm going to guess that we're going to fit about 2 such questions in, and whatever question is in process at 5:15 will be the last question, and then we'll go to voting on the supplementaries at that time.
I'd ask for unanimous consent to go to 5 minutes for this final time. Just I think it might get us an extra person or so.
It would in fact get us 1 extra person. Is there unanimous consent to go to 5 minutes in this round? It appears to be consent, so we'll start with Remy for 5 minutes. Thank you, Remy.
Madame la Ministre,
Madam Minister, I'd like to thank you for agreeing to meet the committee, and I'd also like to thank you for having the colleagues from your collaborators from the department as well. There are lots of pressing and urgent matters that have been dealt with in your presentation and in your answers to our questions. One of the questions that I consider to be important, I represent a constituency that represents half of the Gaspé Peninsula. There are 3 Mi'kmaq communities, and I've had the opportunity to meet them on several occasions during the election campaign and afterwards. An important issue for this group is education. I'd like to hear what you have to say on the particular aspects of education programs that you are considering. I hope that we will begin 2016 with improvements. In dealing with the real requirements of schools in reserves. When it comes to dealing with literacy, for example. And numeracy as well. As well as preparing children for school. It is very important for them to be ready for school. When they start their education. And to close this gap between young people on reserves and the rest of the community, we think that this is something that must be addressed. It's something that the government will have to deal with, and it's important for the future of Canada. Thank you. A supplementary question here. In the supplementary estimates, there would appear to be $40 million that is allocated for First Nations education. And this program is provided in the form of grants and contributions. As I understand it, it would appear that there would be 2 or 3 weeks before the end of March. I'd like to know how the department will be in a position to spend this amount of $40 million within such a short period, 2.5 weeks. You talk about a system that is broken. This may be a concrete example where we do have a specific difficulty here. The funding that is identified here has, in fact, been committed by the department. It is in order to provide additional funding that the Parliament is being requested to approve these supplementary estimates. We've already done what is normally the practice. Once the authorization was received from the Treasury Board, we've started committing these funds. So funds can be spent by the end of the fiscal year. They are identified and they can be increased in the middle of the year. Thank you.
We can put it forward.
Oui, peut-être juste pour terminer rapidement.
In conclusion, quite quickly, mention was made of the fact that the languages of the communities are important. The community that I represent is making a significant effort to ensure that education is carried out with respect for their culture and their language. And perhaps it might say something about the importance of education in the Aboriginal language. Yes, it is certainly very important, and it is something that in the past was considered to be an extra. But I think that nowadays its importance is recognized. The importance of some type of cultural identity and to have a proper budgeting for communities and schools. Because its cultural identity is a very important asset when it comes to individual success.
The next question is from Todd Doherty, please. Are you sharing your time, or is it 5 minutes for you? Okay, yep. Todd, please.
Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister Bennett. There is no two ways about it. Your passion shines through for this file, and that I commend you, and I commend your office for the work that you've helped me with in my riding at Caribou Prince George. I do have some concerns, though, and I think our colleague that was here earlier also shares with some, and my colleagues too, from my party as well too. And it's over clarity of a plan moving forward, and all the passion in the world still leads to failure when you don't have a plan. And I think the concern is that we're growing hope, we're building hope with no plan behind it. We're throwing money at programs, in your own admission, that are broken, and there's no plan behind it. So that's just a statement. But again, I'm going to go back to UNDRIP if I can. Articles 26 to 32 cause some real concerns, and there needs to be clarity around that. I guess my question would be: is reading UNDRIP as how it is today, Articles 26 through 32, in your mind or in your understanding, could that have an effect on our existing ports and airports and major transportation routes?
See my colleague Romeo shaking his head. So this is that's not what anybody wants.
No, I just
and
want.
So
there needs to be
I
clarity.
wanted to say firstly, Todd, that I was very grateful to see your passion in receiving us in Prince George, and being there for your town has had some of the worst. With Highway of Tears, a judge, a medical examiner, the youngest serial killer. You have
Silcoteen land claims.
You have a lot going on there, right. and Silcoteen as well. So you demonstrate that this is not a partisan issue, and I think we do want a plan, and we do want to set some targets that will be not only about getting land claims settled, but also high school leaving, all of those. And we're in the business of together trying to set some targets and get these things, and the clarity such that people aren't worried about.
So would it affect, in your mind today, as we sit here today, ports, airports, major infrastructure that currently exist, which could be traditionally or former traditional territory?
It's never really been about taking lands away or expropriating. It's about planning together going forward.
I understand that, but it also calls for UNDRIP also calls for fair and equitable compensation if that is not available.
No, exactly.
And has that been considered as we move forward?
So, yes, recognizing existing rights and title. And compensating appropriately is the plan. We actually have to do that. And so, I live in Toronto. The land claim for Six Nations would be in the trillions. Right. They aren't interested in bankrupting the government of Canada on their land claim. They're interested in figuring this out. What they were promised in the Haldeman Tract never happened. So we've got to figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my next question is, it goes to your mandate letter, and it is about one of the points for me that I think is most important, because without education, we can't lift people up. And I want to understand, or maybe you could clarify for me, with respect to First Nations education, have you considered comparability of education to be a priority? Meaning, is this essential, do you feel that someone given a grade on reserve would be able to seamlessly transfer to off-reserve education. If you support comparability, what do you plan to do to ensure that education investments mirror that as we move forward?
You're left with 10 seconds, I'm afraid, Minister.
That's what we should aspire to. The kids should be able to switch schools but also we know that by even the number finishing high school. We know if kids don't make that transition from learning to read to reading to learn at grade 3, they will fake their way through until they drop out in early high school. We have got to actually know what's going on. And it means it's not just putting kids through, and it means dealing with adult literacy. It means dealing with all of the things that are the elements of success for these kids, and we need them to be successful and to be able to get to post-secondary education and help our country go forward.
Has it been considered in your plan?
I'm sorry, we're right out of time. In fact, we're over time.
Yeah, it's about results, Todd. Yeah, it's not about money.
Okay.
It is about money, but it's also about results.
This leaves us with time for the final question of this afternoon, which goes to Romeo Saganash, or perhaps you're sharing time on that.
5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Thank you. Just briefly before I go into my first question, I sense the insecurity or the fear that's been expressed by some members on this side of the table with respect to UNDRIP and FPIC. I just want to remind people here that the way we interpret declarations or the law, you don't read articles in isolation, that you have to read the document in its entirety. So when we only make reference to provisions that contain the free, prior, and informed consent, it's sort of a mistake. I just want to remind people that Article 46 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, paragraph 3, says this: the provisions set forth in this declaration shall be interpreted in accordance with the principles of justice, democracy, respect for human rights, equality, non-discrimination, good governance, and good faith. And that's how it works. And I still recall when, back in 1975, when the Cree signed the first modern treaty, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, how the hunting and fishing associations thought, oh, well, if the Cree are given the right to hunt, fish, and trap throughout the year, there goes the moose population, there goes the caribou population, there goes the fish population in the territory. It never happened. The world did not stop turning that day. It's the same thing since 2004 when the Haida Nation case came down. The world did not stop turning. Same thing since Chilcotin. The world did not stop turning. So let's stop this fear-mongering. First, my first question is about some of the gaps and targets that should be set by your department in terms of considering these supplementary credits. What specific targets has the minister or the department established for housing, education, safe drinking water, infrastructure, health outcomes, and so on and so forth? Because these are questions that are also in your mandate letter where you have to make a real progress on. I know that in the mandate letter that the language is omitted from that enumeration, but perhaps you can speak on that first.
The language and culture is in the mandate letter of Minister Jolie, but there's no question that I see language and culture as part of my mandate in early childhood education, in K-12, and anything that we do. This is the only way we're gonna have kids be successful. So I see it as my mandate understood in the way forward. On the targets, I mean, I think even in language and culture that we need to be setting targets about the languages that might be disappearing, or how many language speakers are there in each of the languages. I think we can do a good job by just measuring that, but also the conversations I'd have with Minister Jolie about making sure that there are digital recordings of language speakers, and how do we make sure that this is protected in the way that we now can. In the other targets, clearly, the platform was really clear about, well, water advisories being stopped within 5 years. But you and I know that there's lots of places that don't even have water to boil. There's places that don't have any taps to turn on. That northern Manitoba, you know, it's shocking. So we are pleased that the provinces and territories, a lot of them have decided to help us with this. But we're gonna have to get this thing done. On housing and in education, in terms of we will have a retreat as a department, and in the Prime Minister's mandate to us, we will deal with deliverology. We've got to sit, but even in setting realistic targets, that has to be done in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. What's realistic? Because I remember being part of targets that said Canadians will be, you know, 10% more physically active by such and such, and you hadn't even talked to anybody or figured out how you were going to do it. So what, by, when, and how is part of the strategy, but the what has to be realistic, otherwise people give up. And so I'm very keen that it's something that maybe, you know, any of these things we would love the committee to help us with. But setting targets is going to be important. Give him just his last. Romeo should have the benediction here.
Mr. Speaker, if I could, I just a point of order real quickly. For my honourable colleague and the Minister Bennett knows my passion for this comes purely honestly. And with the greatest of well-being. This is not out of insecurity, and it's not out of fear. It's out of clarity, and it goes to my original comment. We need to have clarity around this document, and not out of fear and insecurity. We're not trying to cause that. As here, we need to be leaders, and if we are going back into our communities to talk about this, we need to be able to talk to our constituents about it. And so, you know, I take a little bit of offense to it, and because I'm deeply passionate about this.
Todd, I'm not hearing a point of order there, my friend. Okay, thank you.
But Todd, I think that I'm happy to come back at any time. But I think the UN guide, the parliamentarians' guide, will be very helpful on this, and then maybe we can talk about it. Or you might want to bring Willie Littlechild and you know, all the people that were involved in writing that guide. But you know, I think we've got a lot of work to do on this together.
Thank you very, very much, Minister Bennett, and thanks also to the departmental officials who are with us here today as well. Much appreciated. As we are dangerously close to finishing on time, I'm not going to suspend while we thank and say goodbye to our guests, but we're going to move right into the voting. And to get that ball rolling, I'm just going to call the first question, which is, shall vote 3C under Canadian High Arctic Research Station carry? What's the pleasure of the committee? I see all in favor, hands please. Okay, the motion carries. Vote 2, should vote 1C under Indian Affairs and Northern Development carry? Can I see hands please? The motion carries. Vote 3, shall vote 5C under Indian Affairs and Northern Development carry? The vote carries. And finally, shall vote 10C under Indian Affairs and Northern Development carry? Show of hands. The vote carries. We have concluded our business for today. May I, there is a final question I must ask. Shall I report the votes on supplementary estimates to the House? Yes, seeing assent, we'll do so. Thank you very much, and may I have a motion to adjourn? We're adjourned. Thank you.
Woo.